Hi, this is Dr. Nick. I'm the Incrementalist and I'm also a whiskey librarian. Special treat for the holidays. I've got 3 samples of whiskey from the Scottish Malt Whisky Society to run through today. The good news is at least one of them is still available. The other 2 are out. They were part of a whiskey tasting that I went to earlier on, and unfortunately so delightful that they've already sold out. But don't lose hope. Sometimes they keep a few bottles back and they show up in what's called last drop, so you could still get them. So the Scottish Malt Whisky bottles things and gives them names and numbers, and here are the 3 bottles. You can see varying names. In this case, a 93.117. It's the Asian Coastal Delights, and this one is a 76.144, and it's I Caught the Darkness. This final one that I showed you, this is Tokaji and Tugboats. That's the one that's still available, so if you're looking, now's the time to go checking it out. So we're going to go through these in order. We're going to start with this one. So this is I Caught the Darkness. It's a 76. And what does 76 mean in this context? Well, with my handy dandy cheat sheet, don't need it anymore. You can just look it up on the web. There's lots of examples, and it even comes with a useful map on the back. This is a 76, and this chart tells me that's a Mortlach. That's one of my favorite distilleries. It's one that not many people are familiar with, and is actually running in the same wheelhouse as a brand that many people are familiar with, the Macallan. So it has a lot of sherry notes, a lot of variation, so you can't just exclusively say that will be the case. And in this case, all 3 of these I selected and wanted because not only were they similar ages but similar alcohol content. This one is a 13-year-old, so it's coming from the Mortlach distillery. That's a Speyside distillery, and it was in a typical bourbon Spanish oak Oloroso butt, and then it was finished unusually with a Baroque. It was a charred red wine Baroque barrel, so that gives it some additional flavor. Now I poured these out to save a little bit of time. You can see we're going to cover a little bit of different glasses, and if you can see that, there's not a lot of legs in this, so this comes in at a 60% alcohol content, so much higher than the traditional whiskey that you buy over the counter. It's what's called cask strength. And when we smell a whiskey, what you get from this is in this particular instance, it's a very fruity apricot. There's a little bit of barbecue sauce and some ginger and some lime in there. Now at 60%, some people would add a little bit of water. I've got a little dropper here so that I can add some in a second if I choose to. And I often close my eyes just to really put myself, and taste is such a personal thing. And for me, this is a Christmas taste. It's got brandy butter, if you're familiar with that, with Christmas puddings. I can taste brown bread. That's very traditional in the Irish households. There's certainly some spiciness, and you know, even a little bit of cider, and you can pick up that charring that was from that red wine charred barrel. This, of course, just classical Mortlach for me, and it was such a delight. Now, before we get to the next one, just a quick word about HIMS, which is coming up in March of this year in Orlando. And I will be running at least one whiskey tasting. Next Gate have agreed to sponsor a whiskey tasting. We'll be doing something exactly like this, but in much more detail. So you should go check out Next Gate, see what they're doing, and see if you can score yourself an invite, because this is exactly what we'll be doing at HIMS on the first day. And if you're interested in doing this on your booth and having me come and do that, we've got one spot available still to do a whiskey tasting for you on Wednesday. So let me know, or let Healthcare Radio now know they're booking and doing all the sponsorships. Now, what about the second one? So This is a 93 Asian Coastal Delights. Now, this is another one for me that's a true delight because it's a Campbelltown. So Campbelltown is one of these distilleries, and it can be hard to see this, but if you see this map, looking over down at the bottom, people quite often know the Islays and Laphroaig and those areas. Campbelltown is even further south, and there are only 3 active distilleries in that location. Has some similar traits, but in fact some of the Campbelltown distilleries for me, Springbank in particular, is another one of my absolute favorites, and this particular one is a Glen Scotia. So if you remember, it's got a very similar sort of color, but again, we're not seeing that same legs where we see the spirits catching to the side. That tends to be an indication of a different style of content. We'll see that in a second. And this particular whiskey is, I think, 60.3. It was bottled in 2006. And a completely different, so same kind of age. This one was in an ex-bourbon barrel, but despite all that, so different. One, because of the location, but also because of the barrels in use, and the whiskey and the distilling process and the water that they add. This has got, I want to say, this sort of soft, gentle caress. It's you can almost feel the smoothness. It's like you're stroking a rug, and you can feel that delightful sort of smoothness, some floral, and then there's some sea salt. You can almost just feel that sea that's right around the island and around the Glen Scotia distillery. And there's this hint of pineapple that sort of reminds me of Hawaii. Oh, and this hint of sweetness with this delightful spiciness. Not a spiciness that you would dislike, not a sort of heat that people go, ooh, that's peppery, but just this sweet and sour almost, if you happen to like that in the, some of the foodstuffs. I can get this sort of Asian kind of honey and maybe a little bit of sourness. Maybe some crispy fried beef. It's just a true delight. And, you know, once again, these Campbelltowns, if you can find them, I would encourage you to get them. Now, what about the third? So this is the one that's still available, and if you want to go to the Scottish Malt Whisky Society, you can pick this up. You have to be a member. These are member-only bottles. Membership's well worth it. I would ask that if you do go and join, please mention my name. I do get some credit, so there's certainly no harm in that. And this one, coming from the domain that many folks quite often know of, so the Islays, but in this particular instance, this is a Caol Ila or Caol Ila, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So it's actually spelt slightly different, C-A-O-R-L, but we say that Caol. And this is 60%, so again, same kind of alcohol content. And it's an 11-year-old, so very similar age, but because of where it's coming from and because of the uniqueness of that distillery, this particular one, it might be hard to see, but you can see the legs. There's definitely clinging around the glass, and you can see I'm using a slightly different glass, so there's different sorts. The main point about these is you see they narrow at the top so that you can really compress the spirits, and oh my lord, wow, completely different. So this is now an extraordinary Islay classical whiskey, and you can just pretty much see the puffs of smoke of the peaty coal-fired power station, just this really intense sort of smoky sea breeze sort of built into this, and that's opened up from when I first poured it, which has you know, given it sort of a slightly softer oily mechanic-y feel. But and the oiliness, so that legs that we see around the side and the clinginess has exactly the same effect when you drink this. And even though this is at 60%, it's delightfully rich, you can almost chew it and swallow it down, and it has this glorious, lasting, warming effect. If you're sitting by a fire for the holidays and you wanted something to drink, this would be it. So I drink all sorts of whiskies. I have different moods, different times, and I can tell you that the Islays and these oily, smoky, sort of mildly sweet with a hint of almost a bit of mint in there, just salty and dry, that sits with you and warms you. You could almost feel it and feel the fire without having a fire. It's got this delightful warmth. So a delightful little whiskey. This one, 53.298, so from the Scottish Malt Whisky Society. And if you want to join and buy that one, there are still some bottles available, but just based on the other two, which got sold out and they had very similar amounts, I would tell you, don't hang around. I hope you enjoy the holidays. I hope you enjoy perhaps a wee dram, as I would say for tonight's tipple. I know which one mine is going to be. It's going to be the Caol Ila, because it's just one of those cold winter days, and it's just the perfect drink. And if you want to experience this firsthand, imagine getting this in your booth at HIMS and having a tasting experience and being able to invite some of your guests and going through this. We'll be going through the same sort of experience and giving you a little bit of a journey through different whiskies, different regions. Then reach out to Healthcare Now Radio or myself. We've got one spot available. Otherwise, you might try and check out Nextgate and see when they'll be offering and how you might be able to score an invite. This is Dr. Nick wishing you a very happy holidays. I hope you enjoy the time off, and I hope you enjoy some of these tastings as much as I clearly do.